Hi, this is Felicity. Today I'll be interviewing Victor from Ready Artwork about website ADA compliance.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Felicity. I'm Victor Huynh from Ready Artwork. I'm the digital strategist here at our agency, and I talk about everything digital when it comes to marketing. So hopefully today we'll have a good conversation and we'll be able to learn something.
Yeah, so I did want to talk about website ADA compliance. I know that over the past couple of years, ADA or Americans with Disabilities Act has been really relevant to business owners that have websites because you have to have obviously that accessibility factor to avoid lawsuits. So I know that there's several different reasons why you would need an ADA compliant website, but I was hoping you can elaborate a little bit more on that since I don't know the specifics, but I was hoping you could probably touch on maybe the legal side of it and then other items like for marketing, the SEO benefits as well.
Sure. So this is a great topic because, like you mentioned, in recent years, it's hit news quite a bit. Where originally only big businesses were getting in legal trouble with big lawsuits, like Domino's and some of the major brands. But more recently, it's been trickling down to small businesses like local restaurants and everything that are facing legal issues with their website. So just so everyone knows, ADA compliance refers to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it's the same exact law that was set up for wheelchair accessibility that goes into a door, right? Or the sink height or the toilet accessibility. It's the same exact thing, but applied to a website. And that's where we start running into some issues because this law was written pre-internet, mainstream internet at least, right? By Bush in the mid 90s, I believe. So what's actually happening is, people that need accessibility help visiting websites are not able to. So if you imagine someone that is visually impaired, they can't see, they're blind or might have a hard time, they'll usually have a reading software on their computers that's installed. And they would go and read all the text that are in a website, and then they would be able to understand and access information as much as possible as a normal person that is not visually impaired. And what happens when a website is not accessible? The texts are embedded in images, or the texts are kind of set up in a certain way that the readers cannot read it. So then now you're denying people equal access to information or benefits of the website. So that's where the crux is happening in terms of how it's being interpreted by the law. So from a legal standpoint, there is merit, but at the same time, what's happening is that there are also people taking advantage of this and really going out of their way to try to make money off of this situation. And then you also mentioned SEO benefits, brand benefits, right? So there's obviously the most urgent thing is to stay out of legal trouble, right? I think that's what drives a lot of people. But there's also the ethical side of why we need ADA compliance, is so that as many people as possible can access the internet, because in this day and age, it's a big disadvantage if you don't have the internet, right? If you don't have full access to the internet. And we as a society want to make sure we take care of as many people as possible and give everyone equal access to a big advantage in our society. So having an accessible website kind of contributes that it's the right thing to do. The other thing is that when you have an accessible website, so when the readers can crawl your website, navigate it properly, just like someone with disabilities can, it also, as a byproduct, makes it a lot easier for Google to crawl. So when we say SEO, search engine optimization, it's basically Google going to your website and figuring out what it's all about, and then populate it onto the search results. So when you have readable text, when you have images that are clearly labeled, when you have everything that's accessible to everyone, as many people as possible, the byproduct is that Google also has an easier time ranking you and putting you in the right place in front of the right people. So that's one of the biggest SEO benefits. And branding, if people visit your website, it represents you and your brand, your company, 24 hours a day, right? When people visit it. So when it's accessible and it's easy to navigate, then obviously people are going to feel good about it. Versus, if they are having trouble accessing it, then it's going to create, obviously a negative feeling, especially if they have impairments and they can't access when they want to. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and those were some great points to touch on. I mean, there are, as you pointed out, several reasons why businesses should have ADA compliant websites. Like you talked about with SEO, prioritizing the ADA compliant websites or the brand reputation. So the next step, if a business was asking themselves, is my ADA website compliant, would be how do they know? So I would like to kind of get more information on how businesses can easily test if their website is ADA compliant. And then
Mhm.
I think we can also talk about the difference between plugins or overlays versus actually compliant websites. And then we
Yes.
can talk about more of the audits that they can do to really check for themselves to help avoid those lawsuits.
Yeah, great. So there are obviously a big range of businesses out there, from mom and pop all the way to multi-million dollar, multi-billion trillion dollar companies, right? And everyone has different budgets and expectations when it comes to their website and keeping it ADA compliant. So on the entry point, there are free tools out there. If you use Google, one of the most popular ones are Wave, right? It's a nonprofit organization, and that you can quickly run a free scan on your website. The challenge there is that it only scans one page at a time. So if you have a 5-page, 10-page website, you can copy each URL, put it in, and do a scan. And it's pretty straightforward. You can have whoever built your website, go, hey, these are the problems I have. Can you fix them? Right? Assuming they're pretty straightforward fixes, they tend to be able to do most basic stuffs for you. The point is to get it, make a good faith effort. From a legal standpoint, I'm not a lawyer, obviously. This is not legal advice, but from my understanding of how the court systems are looking at ADA cases is the business making a good faith effort to make sure that it's as accessible as possible. So just by the fact that you went out and scanned and asked whoever built your website to try to make these fixes, that is a favorable thing in front of court, right? Obviously. And obviously there's a lot of free scanners out there. And then there's also some very expensive scanners out there where it can cost upwards of $10,000-$20,000 just to subscribe and run a report, and those get very detailed, right? They'll give you both the design, UI, UX, user interface design issues. They'll also give you coding issues, right? How your website was built and the technical aspects that can make it more accessible. And I'm not going to get into too much detail in terms of how to fix things in this episode, but we can touch on that in a future episode if it's something of interest, right? So those are the two ends in terms of at least where you start, right? Benchmarking what the issues are and then understanding. So on a high level, there are different grade systems. There are 3 grade systems. There's AAA, AA, and single A. When we look at ADA compliance in general, AAA is you adhere to every single guideline 100%, right? And it's possible to get AAA, but sometimes it's not ideal because if you have a 100% compliant, sometimes you're giving up on some branding or creativity. So if you have some interesting transitions or you have certain things on your website that are more dynamic, then it might be hard for you to get AAA. So it's nice to have, but as a pretty common standard out there, we want to be at least AA compliant meaning that there's a grading system, right? And then single A is pretty much useless. Once you have it, it really doesn't really address your accessibility. Your website's still pretty bad. So for the most part, we would say we would aim, for a double A or higher, right? In terms of where we want to be in compliance. And then the other question you asked is, you mentioned something called overlay, right? Versus the other option is a manual fix. So let's go over what an overlay is, and then we can talk about manual as well. So overlay is basically a software. There's a lot of companies out there, but there are a couple really big ones that are really popular. You'll see a little blue pop up on the side of some websites that are using what we call overlays. And sometimes they work, but in general, the issue that I have personally with the overlay is that it doesn't aim to solve at least the cheap options, right? There are expensive overlay options, but the mainstream cheap options are really built to hide the problems, right? So they're not trying to fix it for accessibility's sake. They throw a layer on top of it, and they try to interpret a bad website and add text to it or add something like that. So basically the goal of that is to trick these scanners that this is ADA compliant. So a lot of times they use something like a language like JavaScript to interpret a bad website and then say, hey, I'm going to make it compliant. And then when the scanner comes by, they check all the check boxes, right, when it comes to ADA compliance. To me, yes, it's cheap. It's like buying a cheap insurance, but it doesn't really solve the underlying issue. Now, some of these companies do have a combination of manual, or they give you tools to manually fix it. So those might be a little bit better. And then on the other end, you can hire an expert that knows ADA compliance and what's entailed in it. You run an actual report. Sometimes it's a paid report, right? Especially if you have a bigger website. And then from there, you have an actual list. It spits out a list of what needs to be fixed. Some of the main components, some of the common issues, ADA issues, are contrast issues. So if you think about, people with visual impairments, when things are low contrast, they're harder to read. Font sizes, color. So most of the people don't think about people with colorblind. So there's actually a big percentage of our population that are colorblind. So certain color combinations don't show up well on screen. And then the biggest culprit is really embedding text and images. So if you go to Photoshop and you type something out and then you flatten it and then you throw it onto your website, what happens is when the reader comes through or the Google bot comes through, all they see is a block. They're not able to read the text that's in the image. So two ways to go around that. You either code it in a way where that is live text, where you can copy and paste it, or you have to tag everything and on the back end meta tag what those descriptions are so that the readers can read it, right? But there's really no way around it other than fixing it. So you would hire an expert, either your web developer or an ADA expert that would then give you a list of what needs to be fixed, and I would actually go in and fix it, right? The other thing from a coding standpoint is that you should be able to navigate a website with a keyboard. So if someone has problems using a mouse, they can just hit the tab button and then go from a page to button to button and then hit enter, be able to open it. So that's one of the key tests to see if, from a coding standpoint, are you ADA compliant? So can I navigate the website without the use of a mouse, right? So those are some common issues, but there's obviously a lot more. I just wanted to give everyone an understanding, right? So that's what's involved with manual testing versus an overlay where they're hiding the issue. The other one where you're actually it is going to cost more. It is going to be more work, but at the same time you're solving the problem and you're actually minimizing your risk, and your website is going to benefit from SEO as well. So those are the two big differences in terms of ideology and solutions when it comes to becoming ADA compliant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those were some great points to mention, especially because some of the big brands like Accessibility, as you may be familiar with as well, those ones are really big and it's easy for businesses to get wrapped up in an easy solution. But like you said, the reality is not, it's not always an easy solution. So it's definitely worth the investment, it sounds like, to go through that manual route.
Right, right. So, um, as your website develops too, right? If you have a static website that really that you don't go in and touch, which is that means you're not using it for marketing, then you're probably not going to have too much of accessibility issues on an ongoing basis. But if you have a dynamic website, you're using it for marketing, you're creating landing pages, you're adding content, right? Through this process, I would say have a regular scanner or subscribe to a scanning service that then makes sure that you're compliant on an ongoing basis, right? And then if there are enough issues, then you can just have someone go in and fix it. You know, I did touch on some of the big multi-million dollar companies. Those are actually required to have an in-house ADA compliant officer that oversees that whole process and make sure that everything is running smooth. So that's a little overkill for most of us. But having a subscription that scans and then having some kind of a cadence, depending on how active you are, monthly, quarterly, annual, to do a review is definitely a good idea when you want to protect yourself against legal issues.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing all that information. I think that'll be super valuable to businesses that might have a plugin or businesses that may not be aware of ADA lawsuits or regulations right now for websites. But thank you for sharing today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank
All right,
you.
awesome.